Okay, everybody click OK.
Oh,
Yes.
upper right, got it.
Yep.
Okay, I see Bob twice.
Yeah, I do too. It looks like he's trying to connect to audio on one of those sessions, Brad.
Yeah,
Okay.
he's trying to fix his
Okay.
connection.
Okay, I'll go ahead and introduce the session then while he's doing that, figuring that out. Evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's IDS Facebook Live event. We're thrilled to have you here to dive into this extraordinary genealogical journey with our special guest. And Bradley is actually the one who came to us and said, you know what, why don't I share my journey? And he brought along all of his distant cousins. And if you've seen the last journal, you will see that he wrote a captivating article called Ann Taylor of Virginia and Indiana. And that's, like, again, I said, in our October issue of the IGS Journal. So tonight, Bradley and everyone here that has joined him is going to walk us through the journey of putting this story together and kind of showing how you can collaborate and work together with your distant cousins to really, put that story together. So, Bradley, I'm going to turn it over to you to share your screen. And if you want to introduce everyone, or if everyone wants to introduce, however you guys want to do it. So I give you the floor, Brad.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, the Zoom is not being cooperative here.
Okay, do you see where the share screen?
Yes.
Okay, you should be able to click on that. And Kay should have already given you the ability to share your screen, and it should show you, if I remember
Yeah,
correctly,
making me
show a
change
screen.
preferences and stuff.
Oh,
Okay, let me keep trying this.
okay. Technology is always changing things, and that's why we always got to play around with it.
That's so true.
Well, while Brad is working on bringing his screen up, do we want to have everyone start introducing themselves?
Sure.
Sure. Okay, I'll go first. I'm Mary. I come from the Kaufman line, and my grandmother Rose Jansen is the granddaughter of Anna Taylor. Amy, you want to go?
Sure. Amy Kathman, also from the Kathman line. And my great grandmother is Rose Jansen. And my grandfather telling this story is what got me interested in genealogy. And I've been doing it for now, oh gosh, it's probably 35 years now. So, okay, Brad or Bob?
Bob, if you're on audio, I'll let you go first. If not, if you guys can hear me. This is one of those stories, again, that kind of launched me into the whole genealogy thing too. So let me see if we can do this screen sharing. Yeah.
Rod, while you're looking for something, Amy, you remind me of when I first heard this story. And we moved from Cincinnati to Philadelphia when I was about 11. And for my sister's wedding, my mother's only sister, Rosemary Jansen Rollinger, came up for the wedding. And I remember sitting in the kitchen and Aunt Rosemary telling all of these stories about the family. And I remember her telling the story about Anna Taylor and her daughter, Mary Mackey. And that story is the story that every family line knows. It's an oral history of Anna Taylor and how she fell in love and how they ended up in Indiana. And yeah, it was a a precious moment to have that time with Aunt Rosemary and hear about all these family stories.
Mary or Amy, do you guys have the PowerPoint that I shared an earlier draft at least? We can do that as a backup because it's not letting me share it.
Okay.
Yes, I will find it.
And we'll have Kay can switch over admin to you guys to share your screen
Sure.
if either of you guys have them.
So basically my story, my great uncle in his later years wrote up these short biographies of each of his grandparents. They were just like 1.5 pages handwritten, and then they were literally mimeographed. Remember the old paper photocopies? So I have that, and he was talking about his grandmother, Mary Mackey, and then he related the story about, her mother being Hannah Taylor and the deathbed confession and all of that. The other ones were interesting too about, the wife made the husband move on another branch because when they walked in the house, they could hear the rattlesnakes underneath the floorboards. So there were just these kind of captivating stories in addition to just names and dates. So I got very interested in the genealogy then, thanks to, again, this is my dad's uncle. I think I only met him that one time at some distant cousin's house. And he shared, I got mimeographs of these stories that I've still got. And again, the Hannah Taylor story is just something that like everyone in the family, no matter which line, has all heard this story about the deathbed confession and trying to find the birth mother. And it's been, several generations now, but we're all still very interested in it. So again, my great uncle, who was my dad's uncle, relayed the story about his grandmother, and it was his grandmother's mother that was Hannah Taylor. His grandmother was Mary Mackey. And for Mary
Here it
Mackey's
is.
story, I'm sorry, what?
Okay, I was able to share it.
Oh, great.
Okay,
Oh,
yeah,
But
yeah,
we've
I'm
got the
just
screen
glad
up.
the rattlesnakes stayed in your family. We never heard about them.
yeah, that was on the Reynolds line.
Did I share it correctly? Okay.
I can see it if you want to go through a couple screens.
I can see it fine.
Is it fine on Facebook too?
Yep, sure is.
Okay, cool.
Okay, go ahead again. And then again, I started because of that story in large part, got interested in the genealogy and kept doing it. And then you can see kind of how far I've gotten. And then again, Hannah Taylor is on the black arrow on the bottom left, several generations back. Yeah. So keep going again because I'm trying to follow with my PowerPoint at home. Again, that's me on the bottom. Then my grandfather died before I was born, but his brother, who is the little boy in the picture next to the arrow, was the one who wrote up the oral histories. So he was talking about not just his father, who's the man with the tie that we'll come back to, and then my grandfather, who's the other little boy, but his grandparents. So his grandmother was Mary Mackey. Mary Mackey was the one who got the deathbed confession and was the daughter we learned later of what the family always called Hannah Taylor, but all the documents and things say Anna. So I guess go to the next slide. So Anna Taylor had 2 children, Henry Mackey in Virginia in about November 1844, and then Mary Mackey in Oldenburg, Indiana in October of 1848, and we have her baptismal record. Her baptismal record is the only contemporary document naming Anna Taylor while she was alive. And that document's in Latin, written in Old German script, but it counts. So again, you can see kind of where I fit that this is several generations back, but again, it was an enduring story that everyone heard. Can we go back a couple, go forward a couple more slides. Okay, so yeah, I guess go back one more. So Mary Mackey married Joseph Jansen, who was also an immigrant from Virginia, like her father, and had 10 kids. Edward died in infancy. Philomena died 19 or 20 and didn't have any children. Larry Bernard also didn't have any children that we know of. But we have oral histories then from the Jansen line, the Schneider line, the Vonderwish. Nothing was written, but I know that the story passed down to them. And then the Kathman line, which was really helpful for this. So we have cousins here, 2 from the Kathman line and 1 from the Schneider line, in addition to me from the Jansen line. Okay, next, I guess. So in order to do this story, again, this is something that's fascinated the family for several generations across different lines. But now with new technologies and new ways of sharing and digitalizing and putting everything online, we were kind of able to put everything together. So the first thing I did was collect every possible source. And a lot of them were just little tidbits. So the oral histories from each of the lines that we've got one, some of them were written, some of them have never been written down. Anyway, took all of the sources that I could gather, a census, baptismal certificate, the death and cemetery information from Mary Mackey that identified her parents, identified all of the information, collated it as much as as possible, and then kind of put it in context. So there were timelines, and then I checked all of the information for biases. I wrote at one point that all of the stories said that they came down the Ohio River on a flatboat because that's what I always knew. And then one of the other cousins corrected it and that no, they didn't have that story. And then I went back and checked my notes. Nobody else did. That was just the Jansen line. I think it was true, but again, it's good to check your biases. That my line got lots of other things wrong. So there was that. The key to placing Anna Teller in a particular family, I found through a website that I don't think still is up from Anne Bloomquist. And there's a picture of me with her at Roots Tech before the pandemic. So she wrote a book, The Tates and Tellers of the South, and then did a lot of follow-up research on those. So she's the one who looked at all the census records and speculated that there was an unnamed daughter for William Anderson Taylor. And then that daughter fit everything from what we knew. So I think that was actually the key to kind of solving the whole thing. So there's Anne there with me stalking her at Roots Tech. So again, I collected all of the information from all of the oral histories from all of the different lines, as well as, we knew when Joseph Mackey arrived in Baltimore in 1839. We knew when he purchased land in Oldenburg, Indiana in 1846. So there was that several years in between that we needed to kind of fill in. We've got Mary Mackey's baptism from 1848. Again, the only document naming Anna Taylor while Anna Taylor was still alive. There was the 1850 census record in Indiana, which named Henry as being born in Virginia. So that's kind of confirmation there, but not a lot of else. Anna had already died and Joseph Mackey had already remarried to the stepmother that raised Mary Mackey and gave the deathbed confession. We know Henry Mackey made his first communion in Oldenburg. He was on the 1860 census, and then he disappears from the historical record. And there's an oral history that he ended up outside of Galveston after working for a railroad, but we've never been able to confirm anything or find him anywhere. We still have Anna Taylor's Bible. It's the King James Bible. Peggy, who's now Sister Jan, has that. So that was kind of confirmation that she was Protestant. And then in that Bible was handwritten birth and death dates for Mary Mackey and the death date for Anna Taylor. It's the best that we've got, but what was written in that Bible from probably Kate and Hannah, a few generations before me, confirmed the oral history that we've got from those. Can we go to the next? So again, there were oral histories from the Kroger line, including some cousins that are here now, the Von der Wisch line, which we're not in great contact with, and we don't really have details from there. The Schneider line, who was helpful on this, the Jansen line, which is my line. Kate and Hannah were spinster sisters. I think most of my family's oral history came actually from them. And then the Kathman line had one of the earliest written oral histories. So that was really helpful. So again, Jim Jansen, who was my great uncle, wrote these stories. So this was the first page of he wrote stories of each of his grandparents. And this is the one that he wrote of his paternal grandmother, Mary Mackey. And that was where I first learned about the Hannah Taylor story. Just keep going. So the Kroger line, I got information from 3 of the 4 siblings that were the next generation down. One of them communicated by email, and then Sister Jan and one of her brothers talked to my dad at Aunt Gert's funeral. For the Taylor plantation, that it was, a plantation outside of Boxwood, Virginia. Boxwood is not very large, and near there. The Von der Wisch line, I had a conversation with an ex-wife of one of the family on Facebook that she had heard of the story and was going to try to get more information from her ex-husband's uncle. That never happened. But again, the story was passed down through all of the lines that we know of. The Schneider line got Bob with us, who was also really helpful, editing drafts of the proposal as I was going along. Next. So again, Rose Kathman wrote down, I think, the earliest version of the Anna Taylor story. She called it the Lost Inheritance. And that, again, I think was the first one that was written down and gave us sort of the basics for the information. Most of the stories from each of the lines told a very similar story. So that was encouraging too, that despite it being passed down through several generations across different family lines, everyone was basically telling the same story. So that was really encouraging. And then there were some details that, different versions kept. So looking at the documentary evidence to try to either challenge or confirm as much of the oral history as possible, we had just a baptismal record. We had the 1850 census that did confirm the Virginia part of the story. And then Mary Mackey's death record and cemetery record both said, Anna Taylor or Hannah Taylor of Virginia. And then we've got, again, Anna's King James Protestant Bible, which again kind of confirmed her religion. And again, the reason that she was sort of excommunicated from her family was taking up with Joseph Mackey, who was an immigrant and Catholic, and that her parents, or father specifically, didn't approve of someone of a lower station of life. And there was an oral history in his Taylor line that they descended from someone in the Book of Saints, I think it was. Anyway, someone who was burnt, an ancestor of theirs was burned at the stake by the Catholic Queen Mary in England. and that would have made it difficult for him to approve of her marrying a Catholic. And we got that oral history from one of the Taylor cousins in Virginia, not a descendant of Anna Taylor. Next. So we know the beginning of the story. We've got Joseph Mackey's immigration record coming into Baltimore in the end of June 1839. And this is the earliest picture that I could find of the harbor that he would have seen when he was there. The next one, this wasn't that important to the story, but at least we had a start for when Hannah Teller would have happened. We know later from much more recent research that he made his first papers, his Declaration of Intention, to be a citizen in 1844. He did that in Washington, Pennsylvania, which makes me think, sort of confirmed my theory that I had, that Joseph and probably his brother were living and working in the Shenandoah Valley, the northern part, the lower Shenandoah, where there was a lot of Catholics, not a lot, but that's where most of the Catholics were, and a lot of Germans. So they would have had a German community and then also some Catholic infrastructure that they could have relied on. So it was kind of a booming time then, especially for German immigrants, and they could have made it more easy for them to find work. So I think that they were in the northern Shenandoah, and there weren't that many courts sort of that weren't along the coast. So they could have gone to, Baltimore, Richmond, or somewhere on the Virginia coast, or there was one courthouse in Randolph County in what is now West Virginia. So they weren't on the other side of the mountains. We know that they stayed on this side, or they would have gone to Randolph. So again, kind of take whatever information you've got and glean as much as you can, and then go with it from there. Next. So this is a terrible copy, and I'm sorry, it's a Xerox copy that I got from about 1990 when I met with Father Adrian in Oldenburg, but that's a photocopy of the entry for Mary Mackey when she was baptized in the baptismal register, the ledger that they've got at the church. So you can see it's Anna Taylor, it's Tailer, which is the best the German immigrant priests could do at that time, but we'll take it. After her name, it says a Catholic, meaning that she was not Catholic. So again, kind of glean as much information as you can out of it. And again, there was the 1850 US Census in Indiana, in Oldenburg. So you've got Joseph Mackey living with his second wife, Teresa. And then Henry is listed as born in Virginia. Mary Mackey's born in Indiana, and then so were then Mary Mackey's half siblings, though she didn't know that they were her half siblings until she was a grandmother with the mother's deathbed confession. So again, we've got Mary Mackey's death certificate that lists her mother as Hannah Taylor, and then also her cemetery record, which listed her parents as Joseph and Anna Taylor, and her of Virginia. So again, the previous slide had her as Virginia, and then this one shows, again, we've got the Anna confirmation again from the name, from whatever sources we could get. Keep going. So this is an inscription in the front of Anna Taylor's Bible that lists her death date and then also Mary Mackey's birth and death dates. So this was obviously written well after the time. It was written, I think, after Mary Mackey died. I'm guessing Kate or Hannah went in and put all the information in. I also contacted the Methodist church that was in Henry County, Virginia then, which is still around. And the earliest records they have was a 1868 membership. It lists a lot of the family that I think was Anna Taylor's. Hills and Taylors and Mitchells, which was Anna Taylor's maternal grandmother's last name. But that's the earliest record that they've got. So there was no confirmation of Anna Taylor in Virginia. Just the records don't exist. They were never created, or they don't exist anymore.
Yeah, and Brett, just to add to that, we also know from the Henry County history of Henry County, which is a published book, that church, that Baptist church, burnt down, I think, around 1850. So it burned down before the 1860s. So that's why they wouldn't have had any earlier records. And that's also the church that her father, or the person we think is her father, was the
He was a trustee.
the trustee.
So the woman who wrote that book then, her grandniece, Stella Hill Darby, emailed with me for years, and she was fascinated by the story, and she did a lot of research that she could find. The church records that I got were actually through her. But she was the one that confirmed to me that her great aunt, whom she called Aunt Dude, made mistakes, and there were lots of things that were missing, including, her uncle was never mentioned. That she just completely missed some of the kids and families, which would also kind of confirm Anna Taylor not being included in the Taylor book or in the Henry County book. Okay, so one of the most important things, again, is just collect all of the information that you have, identify all of the information from all of your sources, and then try to collate that information all together, extracting all of the names, dates, places, any other details, collate the information as much as possible, and then, compute whatever dates you can from years and information that you've got. I tried to map everything as best as I could to get a kind of a more visual analysis. I process information visually, so that was really helpful. So the next slide was the most important one for me. It's what I call the sexy slide. So if you're multitasking and paying attention, this is where you want to tune in again, because this was what I thought was the most important part. I took all of the information that we had, and then there's a list of all of the sources, and that is all of the sources that I originally had on the left column. And then I pulled out information from there. If any of them gave a name, a religion, stories about the socioeconomic status and the reason for not approving it, any places, and then additional notes. And then it was this grid that I used to draft the original story and kind of confirm what I had with the story that fit William Anderson Taylor and in Virginia. I did not put this in a slide that I think that you've got. It was a later version, and I didn't put it explicitly in the story. But one of the things I also did was you analyze every source for the quality. So is the source original, derivative, or a narrative? And then is the information primary, secondary, or unknown? And then is the evidence direct, indirect, or negative? I did that sort of on my own, but I didn't put it explicitly in the journal entry, which was, I was already trying to keep it on the shorter side. Not that that worked very well. So the next thing you want to do is create timelines. So we knew when Joseph Mackey was born, we had his brother Henry Mackey immigrated to Baltimore in 1836. Joseph followed in 1839, also into Baltimore. What I think happened based on the time and place is that Henry arrived, went looking for work. He also made his declaration of intention, first papers in Washington, Pennsylvania. So I think he had moved west into Western Maryland and then hit all of the rest of the German migrants going down the Shenandoah Valley and the Great Wagon Road. And then looking for work. And then Joseph followed and would have found him, would have hooked up with him then. So again, Joseph makes his first papers the same place Henry did. or his brother Henry did. And then Joseph Mackey's son, Henry, was born in Virginia around November 1844. So we know from the census and his first communion about when he was born. So putting those two numbers together, we get about November 1844, but we don't have any specific birth. And we've looked everywhere for potential birth or baptism records for Henry. And if it was created, it does not still exist. And then again, Joseph and his brother Henry Mackey purchased the farm in Oldenburg, Indiana in 1848. So it was just those few years in between in Virginia that we're trying to extrapolate as much information as we can. Joseph did become a citizen. He made his second papers and naturalized actually in 1848, soon, early in the beginning of the year before Mary Mackey was born. We have Mary Mackey's birth and then her baptism, birth from the oral history and what was written in the family Bible, and then the baptism record we've got from Holy Family Catholic Church. We've got Anna Taylor's death date from the entry in her Bible, and then the story of her death from all of the oral histories. And then again, we know that Joseph remarried soon after, and then he and his second wife are in the 1850 census. So after Anna died, and she died from what we understand, complications from childbirth, childbed fever from Mary Mackey. Maria Theresa Meyerweisel was a local woman in Oldenburg, Indiana, another German immigrant, came to help take care of the newborn and then also Henry. And again, Joseph had a farm and everything he was trying to take care of. So this woman moved in to take care of the kids. They eventually married and then produced a lot of their own kids. And again, by the 1850 census, we know that Anna Taylor had already passed. So I had a timeline and then I went and tried to put as many places as possible so I could literally sort of map it out. We know Joseph was born in Oldenburg, Germany. We know that Joseph and Henry immigrated through Baltimore, Maryland. Both of them made their first papers in Washington, Pennsylvania, which again sort of confirms that they were living and working in the lower Shenandoah, the northern part of Shenandoah. We know from Anne Bloomquist's website, where she went through all of the censuses for all of the Taylors, that Anna Taylor was probably born about 1818. So she was just a little bit younger than Joseph Mackey, or about his age. We know that their son Henry was born in 1848, still in Virginia. And then according to the Jansen version of the oral history, they came down the Ohio on a flatboat in the spring of 1845, which would have also fit the geography of where I think they were in the Shenandoah, going up to Western Pennsylvania, or Washington, Pennsylvania, was part of the national road, which would have hit the Ohio River, which would have been the place to take the flatboat down to Cincinnati, and then from Cincinnati up to Oldenburg, Indiana. Oldenburg, Indiana, we know that the brothers bought a farm there together, and then Henry later bought his own farm nearby. Joseph Mackey made his second papers in Oldenburg. Mary was born and baptized there. Anna died there. She's probably buried on the farm. The only cemetery there at the time was Holy Family's. It was Catholic. And Father Adrian was very clear that they would have followed the old German rules, that no non-Catholics could have been buried there. And there weren't really any other cemeteries in a reasonable distance. She would not have gone back to, they would not have taken the body back to Virginia. She had been, again, cut off from them. So she's most likely just buried on the farm. So there's no death record, there's no cemetery record or anything like that. Less than a year later, Joseph remarries to Maria Theresa Meyerweisel, the woman who had come in to help take care of the kids. And it was her deathbed confession to Mary Mackey that was the start of this whole story. And again, all of that was in Oldenburg, Indiana. So I took all of the information that I had, created a timeline, mapped out that information, and then I tried to put those events in an historical time and place. So there was a critical mass of Germans and then also Catholics in the lower Shenandoah Valley. And we know from, I've got some other Maryland lines that I've done research on, including some Germans. The Shenandoah was a big mecca for Germans coming from Southeast Philadelphia and the rest of Southeast Pennsylvania down the Great Wagon Road. There was a great pool of Germans coming down the Great Wagon Road to the Shenandoah. And then also the only meager Catholic infrastructure that existed in the state was based on sort of missions from Maryland churches. So there were Maryland Catholic priests that used to come down to help administer to the Catholics in Virginia, especially, you know, Martinsburg, Winchester, Bath, Shepherdstown. These were all just going down the Shenandoah Valley following the Great Wagon Road, which I think is what most of the people did. So again, I think they came to settle, they would have gone east-west through the National Road, which was relatively new then. It went, you know, east-west through Maryland. They would have gone north and south through the Great Wagon Road in Virginia, down the Shenandoah Valley. Their trip then from Virginia to Ohio probably had them coming down a flatboat on the Ohio. In the spring is when you'd want to come because that's when the snow melts in the mountains and then the water comes down. This is before there were docks on the Ohio River, that it was only basically in the spring that it was very passable. Otherwise, it would have taken a long time to come with a lot of stops unless it rained. And then I've got histories of ancestors from other lines that made similar journeys. So I added those to my own knowledge, but basically that, you know, you got a lot of families together, and when they collected a critical mass, they would all join together on one flatboat. So you'd have, you know, all of the people, if they had any animals, all of the furniture and everything else on one small boat, and then they would come down together. So I made a map of all of the places that I knew of. So at the bottom in the center is Boxwood. I think that's where Anna Taylor was from. And then from Boxwood up to what was then called Big Lick, which is now Roanoke, there was a trail. And you can see the dots then kind of going northwest, north-south direction. That was just the Great Wagon Road. So what was going on in Big Lick at the time was it was a crossroads for animals and for Indians, and then later Europeans. So it became a crossroads. It became sort of like the happening place in that part of the state. So I think what was going on was Joseph must have come, met his brother in the Shenandoah, and then in the spring, or as soon as the snow stopped, would have come down the Shenandoah to Big Lick, which at the time, just to kind of give you a mental image, it was filled with lots of workers hanging out looking for jobs. So picture sort of like a nationwide hardware chain, the parking lot of a nationwide, like the parking lot of Home Depot now, you've got a bunch of immigrants hanging out looking for work. I think that was basically Joseph Mackey. And then I think William Anderson Taylor went up from Boxwood to Big Lick, again now Roanoke, looking for work on the farm. And I think that's where he got Joseph Mackey. So there were only probably a dozen buildings at the time. And Joseph would have just been sleeping under the stars, again, landless peasant looking for work, would have made a very strong impression for William Anderson Taylor on the socioeconomic status of Joseph Mackey, and not suitable for his daughter. So again, looking at the map, they would have gone north-south through the Great Wagon Road and then east-west across the National Road to Washington County, Pennsylvania. Washington County, Pennsylvania, and the courthouse there was part of Virginia until historically not that long ago. And there were two dueling courthouses in southwestern Pennsylvania, one claimed by Pennsylvania and the other by Virginia for a long time. So there would have been sort of a cultural understanding among the Virginians that Washington County Courthouse would have been an acceptable place to go. So if you go to the next slide, I've got the best of that I've got on Washington County, Pennsylvania. So again, both Henry and Joseph made their first papers there. Henry made his first papers there even before Joseph arrived in Baltimore, which again goes back to my theory that Henry was already in the Shenandoah Valley and that Joseph would have followed him there when he arrived in Baltimore. So if you go to the next slide, if they would have gone up, if Joseph Mackey and Hannah Taylor and Henry, who was already born by then, would have taken a flatboat down to Cincinnati, there's a daguerreotype of what the Cincinnati riverfront looked like in 1850. And again, it's, the glamorous muddy shores of downtown Cincinnati at the river. So the flatboats would have just come down and then pulled up to the muddy shore, and then they would have gotten out, people and animals, furniture and everything, wagons, whatever you've got on the flatboat, unload them all, and then they would have made their journey from Cincinnati up to Oldenburg. Oldenburg, Indiana at the time was populated by Oldenburg, Germany immigrants that were obviously, the Mackeys were still in contact with people, which is I think why they went to Oldenburg, Indiana, and they would have known people and probably cousins to go and stay with and visit with before they bought their own farm and settled there. So again, coming to Cincinnati would have been the logical place to go to make their way up to Oldenburg, Indiana. So circling back chronologically to Big Lick again, we know from research Big Lick was there because there were salt licks. There were some marshy areas that would dry out and then there would be salt. And so animals would come and lick the salt, and then that attracted Indians. And then the place was marked as a crossroads then for animals, and then Native Americans, and then Europeans. But again, by the time Joseph was there were only about 10 buildings in what we now call Roanoke, what they would have referred to as Big Lick. So we've got from Find a Grave a picture of William Anderson Taylor. This was, I believe, Anna Taylor's father. So this is the guy that would have gone from his plantation outside of Boxwood up to Big Lick to look for farm laborers. And we know from the 1830 and 1840 censuses that he had not only free blacks working his plantation, which was kind of progressive for the time and place, but he also hired foreign workers. The notation for foreign workers did not continue in the 1850 census, but we know that he had a history of hiring foreign laborers to work his plantation. So it all fits that he would have hired Joseph Mackey and where he would have gone to do that. So again, if we've got the stories, there were only about 10 buildings at the time. One of them was a tavern. And I think William Anderson Taylor, who was, again, a prosperous plantation owner with, slaves and free blacks and foreign workers, would have gone up from Big Lick and stayed probably at the tavern. Joseph would have been just sleeping under the stars. There were buffalo and elk and all kinds of things that he could have seen on the trip, we know from histories of the time and place. So Joseph would have been sleeping under the stars. William Anderson was probably staying at the one tavern, which still exists. And here's a picture of it from not quite back that far, but you know, it's from an 1868 book, and it's I think it's a 1913 picture. So we've got stories of that from other people there from the 1840s that were passed down in histories for the place, which is why I think William Anderson Taylor was probably staying at the tavern and Joseph Mackey was just sleeping under the stars with, you know, wild animals going around. I think that Joseph was only in Boxwood for a year, looking at the tax records and the census records. So he probably got a contract from William Anderson Taylor for a year, happened to be caught in the census, which was helpful for me. And then he was not there again in the next year's personal property tax record. So I think he was there for a year, met Hannah Taylor, they fell in love, but they didn't actually then probably marry or have their first son until a few years later, until 4 years later. So I think Joseph and his brother Henry were working up in the lower Shenandoah, northern Shenandoah Valley, where there were lots of other Germans that had migrated down and were working. We also have a hint from the Schneider version of the oral history where Culpeper came into play. Again, I think they were just working in a rural place, so they named a nearest recognizable place, and Culpeper would have fit. So there weren't a lot of places where they could have gotten married. We know that Joseph was baptized Catholic, married his second wife in a Catholic ceremony, and that both of their children had their first communions in a Catholic church, and that Mary Mackey was baptized in a Catholic church. So I think that they were married in a Catholic church. Um, Based on the time and place, it was most likely in Harper's Ferry. And this is a picture of the church, the original building. It's actually just a drawing, but it's the earliest pictures that I could find of the church that would have looked familiar to them. Harper's Ferry has had a lot of floods, so most of the original buildings have been lost over the years with flooding, but this church was higher up away from the floodplain, and so it's one of the oldest buildings that survived in Harper's Ferry. So what you're looking at is a scene that I think Joseph Mackey and, well, his brother Henry and his son Henry, and then his wife Anna Taylor would have seen. The building behind the church was built after they were there. So again, this is St. Peter's. It's the earliest picture, earliest photograph that I found of the church. So that's I think what it would have looked like for Joseph and Anna. And I think this is where they were probably married. Marriage and baptismal records for this time and place either were not made or have not survived. We checked thoroughly for all of the archives and records for all of these churches. There is no record for the marriage or for Henry's baptism or birth. They do not exist, and we've looked very extensively. But again, there were Catholics in Harper's Ferry going all the way back to 1765 as missions from Maryland churches in Frederick and other places. So again, it would have made sense for Joseph and Henry Mackey, that they would have had an affinity for a Catholic church as they had back in Oldenburg, Indiana, or back in Oldenburg, Germany. So I found a few other pictures, early pictures of the church that were a little bit better. This was taken during the Civil War, preparations for the Civil War. Again, the white building that is in this picture from behind the church was built after Joseph Mackey would have been there, so they wouldn't have seen that, but that's the side and back of the church that you saw the front of before. And then there should be a picture of the steps. Yeah, okay, so that's one of the last pictures before it was redone in a Gothic style, very different looking. But you can see where it's up a little bit from the floodplain. So all of the buildings that were built before that, lower down were washed away in different floods. So this, I think, is either the oldest or one of the earliest buildings that survived all of the different floods in Harper's Ferry. So these are the steps that I think Joseph and Anna Taylor would have climbed going up to the church for their wedding and for Henry's baptism. So those steps are still there. The church still exists. It's been combined with another church. It's run as basically a chapel from the other church. There's only one mass. It's basically just for tourists visiting Harper's Ferry. It's been extensively redone on the outside, but this is what it would have looked like to Joseph Mackey and Anna Taylor. And then there are some pictures of the interior of the church of St. Peter's in Harper's Ferry, which I think are probably pretty similar to what Joseph Mackey and Anna Taylor would have seen. So Edna was wonderful. So as far as the methodology of writing this journal article, one of the things that it was collect as much information, as many sources as you could. For me, Edna was a wonderful surprise. So as you know, that guy in the family that was interested in the family history, I inherited a bunch of papers and photo albums and others from great aunts and uncles and others that people didn't want to throw away, but nobody wanted, so they came to me. I was going through a stack of papers, and there was a letter, I think to one of my aunts, and written perpendicularly in the margin was Edna and a phone number. Well, I didn't know any Ednas, and I had never heard of this woman, but it was like a Sunday at like 7 o'clock, and I thought, what the heck, I'll call. So I did, and Edna answers the phone. And I have no idea how many decades had passed from when that number was written down in this letter to when I called. But she's now she was at the time living in an assisted living facility and not getting tons of calls. So she picked up the phone and we chatted for like 2 or 3 hours. She was wonderful. I kept in touch with her. I called her a few other times. By this time, I'm living in Washington, D.C., though even though I was born and raised in Cincinnati. I arranged with her that when I was going back to Cincinnati one time a few years later, that I would go up to visit with her. And so this is a picture of my visit with her. That's my dad, one of my dad's sisters, but it was the other sister that had the letter that had Edna's number in it. And my 2 dogs, one of them's in the picture, went up to visit Edna. And she remembers when she was a girl visiting the farmhouse where Joseph Mackey lived and farmed. And I thought that was fascinating because it had long since been torn down at this point in 2005. And I'm asking her to describe it, and she just kind of shrugged, and she's like, well, it's a very typical German farmhouse for the era, or for that place. And I'm like, yes, and you have a clear idea of what that is, but I don't. And she was at this time in her 90s, I think. And one of our last links to an actual person who remembered that farm. So I'm asking her to describe it, and she got really flustered because I didn't know what the farmhouses looked like then, because I wasn't around yet and I didn't grow up there. So again, I mentioned that I inherited lots of papers and then also photo albums and things. So I have Kate and Hannah's photo albums, and I brought them up to Edna. A lot of the photos, thankfully, are labeled, but there were a lot that weren't, or there are a lot of group shots where I don't know who all of the people were. So I asked if she wouldn't mind taking a look at it and see if she recognized any of the people. Edna is a descendant of one of Mary Mackey's half siblings, though they didn't know that they were half at the time until her stepmother's deathbed confession. So Edna's looking at the pictures, the photo album, and again, I had been bugging her to describe the farmhouse. And then at one point she just blurts out, well, that's it. And I'm like, well, what is it? So if you flip the slide, I've got several images of Joseph Mackey's farm. So that was his farmhouse. Edna remembers that house. Again, at this point, it was already abandoned and neglected, but it was still standing when she went there for some family reunions in, I think, the 1920s and 1930s. So that's the house where Joseph Mackey lived, probably in Anna Taylor. At that time, it was probably a cruder log structure that they put a new face on. But that is a picture of the house where Joseph Mackey was living from the 1840s on. And then there were several pictures in the photo album of, the barn and some other outbuildings, and that's a picture of one of the reunions and some of the Mackey family there. So that's the barn. Again, there were like 3 pages in the photo album of the Mackey farmhouse and the different buildings. That's Mary Mackey and Jim Jansen, the one who wrote the oral history. And I think she's taking him around on the farm where she was raised. And Mary Mackey died, I think, in 1928. So this would have been an earlier time. Edna wasn't on this trip at because the reunions, I think, were in the 30s. But you can see the house there in the center, and then there were the barn, and then the chicken coop and some other buildings were around, a pigsty and others. So again, we've got not just the oral histories, but photos that were taken. I mean, after Joseph Mackey had passed, but the buildings outlived him. The buildings are long gone now, but there were people alive that I interviewed that remembered them. And again, I've got the oral history written down from Jim Jansen. No, that's the back of him with his mother, Mary Mackey, or I guess his grandmother. So again, it was very exciting for me to have not just these oral histories, but then also the photo albums, because I was the only guy that wanted these things when they were cleaning out people's houses when they passed away. So again, try to collect as much information as you can. There's a few more pictures that they can show. And then where else can we get any information that we can get? So again, as I mentioned, there's another oral history that was passed down another line where we're not in touch with that family anymore, the Von der Wisch line. So I'm hoping that one day we can get an oral history from them that may have some other details that we can confirm. One of the new tools that genealogists have is DNA. So I'm hoping through this article and then other outreach that we'll find more descendants of William Anderson Taylor and Kitty Ann Hill, or other Taylors or other Hills, that we can try to find autosomal matches. And then also we have a granddaughter of Mary Mackey whose mother was her daughter that took a DNA test. So we know the mitochondrial DNA marker for Hannah Taylor. So if we can find an MT Hill or Mitchell, Kitty Ann Hill's mother was a Mitchell. If we can find a direct maternal line descendant of one of them with a mitochondrial DNA test result, we can try to match. That won't prove the story, but if it's different, it would disprove the story. And if it is the same, it's like another arrow in the quiver to build the case. So again, Joseph Mackey came from Indiana, arrived in Maryland, worked in Virginia, settled in Oldenburg, Indiana, traveling with or following his brother Henry. So Henry Mackey, who again made his first papers in Washington, Pennsylvania courthouse before Joseph even arrived, I think they were working. So his descendants would have oral histories or other information that we might have that can help fill in the story. And then also Mary Mackey had a full brother, Henry, who ran away from the farm when he was probably like 15 or 16, and disappeared. We don't have any further contact with any of his descendants, if he had a family or not, or what happened with him. The oral history says that he ended up in Texas. We've not been able to find him. I've written to archives and places in Texas over the years, and so far we haven't had any luck making a connection. But there are a few things that we can still try. So again, the mitochondrial DNA, Anna Taylor's on the next slide in the middle. Her mother was Kitty Ann Hill. Kitty Ann Hill's mother was Lucy Mitchell. So there's hopefully a Mitchell or a Hill, or I guess Taylor from one of Anna Taylor's sisters, that we may be able to find, to get a mitochondrial DNA match. And again, we know the haplogroup, and we've got that from Ginny Kathman. So thanks, Mary, for getting that for us. So that's all I've got. I tried to go quickly to leave more room for questions and discussion. So if anyone else wants to chime in now.
Well, I can. I'm getting feedback, sorry. I don't know what's going on here. Let me see.
Bob,
Yes,
do you have your phone on?
no,
Hmm,
no, how is it now?
it's fine now.
Okay. I can only add a couple of things to what Brad has said. The first is that in the Schneider line, there was always a story that William Anderson Taylor burned the courthouse down to hide the record of the illegitimate birth or the illegitimate grandson. He wanted the record erased. Now, with what Amy has said about the fact that the church burned in 1850, maybe it wasn't the courthouse, maybe it was the church. That's it tangentially kind of fits the story. The other thing is that I did have contact 10 or 15 years ago with the Vonderwish side of the family. There aren't any or many in Cincinnati that I know of. The ones that I could find were all deceased. But I did have an exchange by phone with a grandson who was at the time in his 80s of Clara Vonderwish, Clara Jansen Vonderwish. And he had family stories, the lore of the Vonderwish tribe and everything, but he did not have any history of the descendants of the lines or anything like that. As I said, he was already in his 80s, and he was more than willing to talk about, well, for example, how the Vonderwishes lost all their money. Apparently, Louis Vonderwish decided that all these German women were going to make a lot of Hasenpfeffer, so he invested his fortune in rabbits, and then the women tasted chicken, and that was the end of that.
Bob, I will tell you that I heard that story from the Krogers,
Okay, so
and it was a very lively story that they told about that.
okay. Well, he confirms it then. And that's that. Those are the only two things that I really have to add. I know that the Vonderwish that I talked to in California, I think he was a civilian, retired as a civilian from the Navy, was living in the San Diego area, and I know he had daughters, but I do not know their names, so I can't give any clues to how we could contact them.
So as far as the courthouse records, I kind of pieced a couple of things together from some different oral histories and whatever facts we had. What I have put together in my head, at least, is that William Anderson Taylor was very aggrieved that Anna had run off with this Catholic that he had picked up, to work on the plantation. And again, from oral histories on the Taylor side, she would have been written out of the family record. I think he got himself elected sheriff immediately after she left in order to excise her name from anywhere that might have been in any public record. And in fact, William Anderson Taylor was elected sheriff for only one term in the election immediately after she left. And
Wow.
we've got the records of him as a sheriff, thanks to one of the Holker, one of the other Cathman descendants.
Well, again, that's supportive.
Again, piecing together, the documentary evidence that we've got, and then oral histories from different lines and putting things together. That's the story that I've made up in my head.
Okay.
So Amy, I think we volunteered you to do the DNA project, right?
Yeah, I'm working on it. And there's a lot of autosomal DNA is not easy. We've got a lot of different lines, so we're just trying to figure out. But there's so many generations removed that it's usually only about a match of about, 5 to 15, which is not a lot. And it's hard and it's not consistent across.
So if there's
The mtDNA is where we're really focused on. A lot of the maternal lines, either the women had all sons or never married. So we're searching for kind of who are the potential maternal lines that are still
okay, again on the maternal lines,
viable.
I can also be one of Kitty Ann's sisters, or another
Correct.
maternal
Yeah.
descendant from the Mitchell side.
Yep. Yeah. Well, we've gone back two generations from Hannah's mom, 2 or 3 generations, and then tried to go all the way down to all the potential female maternal line descendants.
Okay, so I will warn you that I spammed all of the Virginia genealogy Facebook groups with adverts for this. So if anyone's watching now or later and they think that they're a Taylor Hill descendant or possibly an MT match, do you want to post something in the chat or something that can be shared that people can get a hold of you to share I don't know, how would you want them to connect with you, I guess, or to share their DNA contact? Jed match numbers or something else?
Not Jed match. I can be found on ancestry.com easily.
Okay. Do you want to post something in the comments for this chat on Facebook now or later? And then again, anyone from Virginia that might be a descendant of anyone that could help. We're reaching out to wherever we can find information to help confirm the story. Again, this is from the 1800s. So.
Do I
And
post in
Mary,
the chat for this? Okay, do I post in the chat?
You can post it in our chat, and John Marie can
Okay.
put it out on Facebook in the
Okay.
comments.
So Mary, it was Nick when he was in Virginia that went and found the William Anderson Taylor records of him as a sheriff. So there were lots of cousins that helped on this story from several different lines and as much as we could find from anywhere. So one of the benefits now is we've got, email and Facebook and telephones and the internet and things to pull all of these stories together. Things that we couldn't do for all of the generations before when Mary Mackey descendants were interested in the story and trying to put it together. We just didn't have the resources that we've got now, not to mention DNA and everything else, to pull these stories together and then make them coherent and then tie them in with other information.
Okay, I'm posting the information for anyone with DNA to contact Amy. Posting that right now.
Thank you.
This is a truly fascinating story. I mean, the story and how you have worked to verify it. all the work that's gone on and working with all those family lines. I mean, it is very fascinating.
The work that went into this. So I was introduced to this story probably about 1980 and sort of tipped my toe into it, but kind of working on it since then, off and on. And then I know other people have from different lines. I mean, this is something that the family's been working on for what, 4 or 5 generations now, Mary?
It could be. 1, 2, 3.
Starting with Mary Mackey, yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, it would be.
So again, it's a story that we've been working on that's persisted and been a fascination of the family for, again, several generations across all the lines. Every line that still exists has some version of this story that the older ones like to tell the younger ones.
And Brett, I would say we were searching for this, and many of us, I'm sure, used the microfiche and went to like places to search through like old census records and stuff. So we were searching for this stuff even before all the newest technology that's available.
Yeah, when I found that 1850 census originally, I was still living in Ohio and came out to visit my cousin Amy Lampkin, who was living out in Maryland then. And we found the 1850 census on one of the old microfiche machines, visiting at the National Archives, because that was where you had to go at the time to find them. And she was not convinced that we had the right family because the wife and the mother was wrong. But of course, we didn't know that Hannah had died and that Joseph had remarried, and it was the second wife that's listed in the 1850 census already.
Well,
I,
that's fantastic.
yeah, I just have to, I love Edna. That must have been so neat to have her look at those pictures and
Okay, so
identify.
in one of the pictures of Edna was an 1830s family reunion, and she was probably a teenager or something, but she was wearing a skirt that was showing her knees. And I gave her a really hard time about that. This 90-year-old woman with my dog on her lap, and I'm teasing her that, what was she doing showing her knees in these
Oh
photos?
my goodness.
So Edna was a riot.
Treasure. Oh my goodness. That is so, I mean, that's a very heartwarming story.
Yeah, they always say interview the oldest relatives first because you don't know that you're going to have that resource later. And of course, Edna's not still with us. That was even when I met her in when she was in her 90s. That was
Wow.
that was 20 years ago. So
That is really neat. Great. I don't think we have any questions on Facebook. We did have a comment though. Do you want to
Yep.
share it, John Marie?
Yep, it says, thank you so much. Your story is so intriguing, remarkable research, which we agree.
100%.
I mean, and the fact that you guys could to look at this project that you guys are all working on as a team, because with more people working as a team, you're really to uncover some of those brick walls.
yeah, it was important for me to figure out what was the same in all of the stories to help kind of confirm that part of the version. And then there were different tidbits that survived in different ones. Again, it was just the Jansen side that said they came down the Ohio on a flatboat. Not all of them, like I thought. So again, check your biases too.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we want to thank everyone. This has been a great presentation. We hope everyone's found it enlightening and encouraging to keep working on your journey and maybe even start collaborating with others. If you have any questions, we've put the contact information down there. And before we wrap up, though, once again, I want to thank all of you guys for coming and being a part of this and sharing your ancestor story. But I'd like to wrap up with letting you guys know the Next, IGS Facebook Live, which will be held October 1st at 6:30 p.m., will be unlocking resources of Howard County Historical. We'll dive into a wealth of information, historical resources available in Howard County. And I have been getting messages from other people. I know some people have asked for specific counties. We're working on it. We're trying to get them to come on up here and share their resources. So thank you all again. And this is recorded. You can either watch it on Facebook. And like I said, if you have any questions, you can even post them in the comments. And you can also catch it on our YouTube channel here within 24 hours. But once again, thank you guys all and have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
you.
Thank